right, guys, here we are. One day later than I expected, but here it is with the Alabama versus Florida SEC championship game preview. So, SEC championship 2016. This first day, I would like to start with talking about Alabama's offense, Alabama's defense. Well, Alabama and Florida's offense, defense, red zone D, injury reports and all that good stuff. Stuff you need to know, or stuff that will be important to analyze before the game. So I'm going to start with defense because defense is both Florida and Alabama's calling card. I'm going to get into some of these numbers, some of these statistics, and break it down a little bit. So as we know, Alabama's leading the nation in total defense right now. We're number one in total defense, giving up 3.96 yards per play, a little bit less than 4 yards per play. As a group, as a whole, giving up 12 offensive touchdowns. Florida, on the other hand, not far behind at number 6, giving up 4.63 yards per play, which is a little bit less than 5 yards per play, and they've given up 19 offensive touchdowns. Now, I'm going to get into a little bit. Well, first I'll just mention the run defense. It's nothing too big to mention. Alabama's, of course, number one in run defense. That is to be expected on giving up less than 70 yards per game. I think they dropped down even lower after the Auburn game. But Florida, surprisingly, is number 31 in rushing defense. They're giving up about almost 150 yards rushing per game. Only about 3.5 yards per attempt, but that is a big difference from like less than 70 to about 150. So that is interesting. They're most vulnerable on a stout defense. They're most vulnerable at giving up a little bit of run yards. But yeah, number 31 in rush defense, Alabama's number one. Now going into before I move on, that's going to be an interesting matchup of we know that Alabama's going to be able to stop the run. It'll be interesting to see how Florida does stopping Alabama's run or trying to stop Alabama's run. They weren't as successful last year against Derrick Henry as well. Now, moving on into the pass defense, this is where Florida has the advantage, and I'll give a quotation marks there. I'm going to delve into why I say it's not necessarily a big advantage. Florida's number 3 in total, in pass defense, while Alabama is number 11. So, but here's an interesting thing. So Florida's only giving up about 158 yards per game in the air. Alabama's giving up only 178.1. So it's not that big a difference in yards. The interesting thing, though, is Florida has only had opponents pass the ball against them 284 times, whereas Alabama's had the opponent pass the ball against them 373 times, just 89 more pass attempts. Really, really interesting. So you would expect that Florida would have less passing yards passed against them because they have a significant amount less passing attempts. So it's basically 2 games worth of more passing attempts that opponents have thrown against Alabama as opposed to Florida. And even with that, Alabama has only given up 9 passing touchdowns all year, while Florida has given up 7. So only a 2 touchdown difference. Now, it's interesting that Florida has 6.12 yards per attempt on their passes. So basically, I was explaining this in my preview for the Alabama versus Auburn game, I believe, or maybe it was a little bit earlier than that. The way yards per attempt works is it takes the average of the amount of yards that opponents have against you divided by the number of attempts total that opponents have passed against you. So let's say you've given up like 3,000 yards passing total on the whole year, and you've gotten about 300 yards passing against you. 300 passing attempts against you for the whole year. It divides 3,000 by 300, which would be 10 yards per attempt, which is ridiculous. It means that your pass defense is porous, but nobody's defense is like that, I don't think, at least not in the top 10, not when you're regarding top defenses. So Florida is giving up 6.12 yards per attempt, while Alabama's only giving up 5.73. I did a little math here. I had to do that to break some things out. To get a 200-yard passing game against Alabama, you need to throw the ball about 35 times just to get to 200 yards passing. On the average, you need to throw the ball about 35 times to get 200 yards, just 200 yards passing against Alabama. So that means that Alabama is actually holding its opponents to less passing yards per game than what you would need to get to 200 yards passing. That's crazy. Florida's not that far behind. The way that Alabama has the advantage in this yards per attempt is that Florida would need to have less passing attempts per game to get to 200, and they do. Opponents only have to pass the ball a few times less against Florida to get to 200 yards. So whereas Alabama's about 35 times, Florida's about 33, 32 times, closer to 33. So that's pretty close, but it's interesting that Florida being the number 3 pass defense actually allows teams to get more yards at a faster rate, albeit a slightly faster rate than the Alabama defense, which supposedly is the number 11 pass defense. And this is supported by the yards per completion stat as well. Alabama is only giving up 11.19 yards per completion, while Florida is giving up 13.37 yards per completion. And what that's saying is that it kind of works in the same way as the yards per attempt with the math. Here's the math here. So if you have 3,000 yards passing and you have 220 passes completed against you, it's the 3,000 divided by the 220. So it's the amount of passing yards total divided by the number of completions total. And what that's basically saying is that when opponents complete the ball against Florida, they are getting on average 13.37 passing yards. That's basically like a first down per completion. And Alabama's at 11.19, so that's basically a first down completion as well, but Florida's giving up a couple yards more. Now, interesting thing is, you may say, "Ooh, that's bad." Well, when you can factor in the yards per attempt as well, with Florida's being 6.12 and Alabama's being 5.73, opponents have to pass the ball. They have to attempt to pass the ball double the amount of times that they are getting those yards on. So basically, opponents are getting about 50% of their passes completed. It's that hard to throw the ball against these defenses that you have to basically, you have a 50-50 chance of completing the pass. And that's pretty low. A lot of teams are giving up more. And in this day of spread offenses and those quick throws, it's really easy to get your passing percentage up higher really quickly. But seeing as how Alabama and Florida are making opponents pass the ball more and do more work to get their yards, that's actually very impressive. So opponents have to pass the ball like double the amount of times just to get a good completion, which is a recipe for doom, which is why most opponents don't have success against Alabama and apparently against this Florida defense, at least in passing. So I did all that just to show you that Alabama and Florida's passing defense is really not that difference. The difference in the ranking is just a few yards, basically. And that's mainly because Alabama has more passing attempts against them than Florida does. So that'll be really interesting. And I've been arguing all year that this Alabama secondary can definitely be argued as the best. And I think this is just one of those ways to show why I think that. Now, in terms of total offense, this is where the disparity gets really, really sad for Florida fans. So, Florida fans, I'm sorry, but your offense is pathetic. It is, it's abysmal, and you know this. And that's not really not putting them down. This is just by the numbers, and I've watched it. It's really sad. Florida is number 114 out of 119 Division I schools. 114. Their offense is that bad. They only have 3,880 yards of total offense. 25 total offensive touchdowns. And comparing that against Alabama, I'm going to give you the Alabama total offense stats. Alabama's not necessarily a world beater on offense, even though we're ranked number 23 in total offense. No one would say we have the best offense in college football with a freshman quarterback. Alabama's offense is ranked number 23, and we have 5,755 total yards, almost 6,000 yards on the season, with 48 offensive touchdowns. So it's funny as Alabama fans, I guess we're all perfectionists and we're looking at our offense like it can be better, not realizing that there are teams who are struggling right now, like Florida's offense, who has their number one quarterback, Luke Del Rio, injured, and they had to bring in Austin Appleby. And their offense is struggling. Alabama's almost doubling the amount of offensive touchdowns that Florida has. That doesn't look good for Florida going against the number one defense. Now, I also want to get into the red zone D. Now, at a glance, Florida has a better red zone D than Alabama, a much better red zone D than Alabama. If you just look at the ranking, Florida's number 3, Alabama's number 57, tied for 57 in red zone defense, meaning that we give up scores at a higher rate than Florida does when opponents get to the red zone. Now, the reason why that would be significant is one would think that red zone defense would mean that Alabama gets leaky in their coverage or in their ability to stop teams from scoring when it gets to red zone. But when you look at the stats, it tells a little different story. So Florida opponents have gotten to the red zone 29 times, and they have scored 20 times, which is only like 0.6 something percent, which is low. But well, and before I get there, Alabama has allowed its opponents to get to the red zone 18 times, and they've scored 15 times, which is close to like 0.8, 0.9%, which is a little bit higher, which is why it's number 57. But the type of scores is telling. Florida has given up 10 rushing touchdowns, 3 passing touchdowns, and 7 field goals in their red zone, while Alabama has given up only 2 rushing touchdowns, 4 passing touchdowns, and 9 field goals in the red zone. So Alabama gives up less touchdowns in the red zone than Florida. And Alabama actually allows opponents into the red zone at a far less rate than Florida. 11 less red zone attempts against Alabama. Out of the whole year, out of 12 games, opponents have only gotten into the red zone against Alabama 18 times, whereas with Florida is 29 times, almost 30. And I think in one less game, 11 games. So I think Alabama actually has the advantage in red zone defense if you're not looking at the ranking alone. Now, the interesting fact is that Vanderbilt, of all teams, is ranked number 1 in red zone defense. I didn't really get into their stats as much about how many touchdowns and whatnot, but I just thought it was funny that they're ranked number 1. Now, getting into the injuries, this is where I see why Nick Saban has fought so hard to keep Scott Cochran and why we've given his salary a raise. If you don't know who Scott Cochran is, look him up. He's Alabama's strength and conditioning coach. But what I see is that Alabama only had one guy really who was hurting, and that was Marlon Humphrey, and he practiced today. So Alabama really doesn't have any significant injuries. We have some guys who may be a little dinged up who are nursing some injuries, but basically everyone's going to play. Whereas Florida, on the other hand, I don't know if they need to get a new strength and conditioning coach. Look at all these players that are going to be missing. These are the players that are just going to be out of the game, not counting the ones who are injured and nursing injuries. Alex Anzalone is hurt. Jared Davis, their best player probably overall on their team, their linebacker, their leader, is hurt. He's going to miss this game. Brian Cox, one of their best pass rushers on the D-line, he's hurt. He's out of this game. Jordan Sherritt, probably their best pass rusher on the linebacker/defensive end hybrid position, he's out. He won't play in this game. Cam Dillard, one of their offensive linemen, he's out. He won't play in this game. Marcus May, one of their DBs or linebackers, he's out. He won't play in this game. Jawan Taylor, another linebacker or another DB for Florida, he's out. He won't play in this game. Nick Washington, one of their better DBs, very talented guy. Most likely he won't play in this game, although he's trying very hard to get in the game. That is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 guys who will most likely not play in this game against Alabama. Florida is struggling from an attrition standpoint. Also, not to mention the guys who are limited. Martez Ivy, their starting guard, he's limited. He's been struggling with the injury. The DB Duke Dawson is questionable. He may not play. And Daniel McMillan is also dealing with injuries. So Florida has an uphill battle based on some of the things that we've seen here. But injury-wise, definitely, we're going to see if some of these guys can play and see how that works out for their team as this week progresses. But thank you for paying attention to this preview. This is just me getting started. I'm going to try to come back with more, maybe highlight some of the matchups. And, of course, I'll do my prediction video as we get closer to Saturday. Thanks for your attention. If you want to discuss more, leave it in the comments. If you just want me to check out anything, I would be happy to do that. Thanks for paying attention.